Chapter 1, Vanguard of Darkness. The bridge of the starship Galaxia descended into chaos as klaxon alarms pierced the air. "Incoming hostile vessel bearing 319 Mark 7. Chief of Security Barroth's gruff voice rang out over the comms. "All stations, battle readiness code Crimson." On the main view screen, a sleek black ship blazed into view, its hull bristling with laser cannons. "Who are they? Do we have an ID?" demanded Captain Narvik from her command chair. "No registry data matching that configuration, Captain," replied Lieutenant Markin at Tactical. "But their mass signatures match the ships that hit the Zendari outpost last cycle." Narvik frowned as a new realization sent a chill down her spine. The attacks on the outposts had been precise, brutal, and utterly without warning or demand. This was no random band of raiders or pirates. The lights flickered as the first salvo of laser fire rocked the Galaxia with a shuddering impact. "Shields at 80%. Return fire authorized," barked Narvik. Ensign Kala Varis's hands danced across her console, launching volleys of blazing ion pulses from the ship's cannons. Yet the enemy vessel seemed to shrug them off, its dark hull scoring hit after hit on the larger ship. "Captain, at this rate our shields won't last much longer," warned Markin. "We're being outgunned." Narvik glowered as the Galaxia shuddered again and sparks rained down from an overhead conduit. "Bring us about heading 180 Mark 3, full impulse, and divert auxiliary power to forward deflectors." Kayla swallowed hard as she complied with the order, wheeling the massive ship around in a desperate bid to reinforce their weakening shields. What was the captain up to? Her eyes went wide as she took in their new heading across the tactical holograms. A dense asteroid field littered the path ahead. "Captain, that debris could shred us." "Not if our pursuers can't follow," Narvik replied with grim determination. "Only way to shake them is to get in tight where we can maneuver better than they can. You're the best pilot on this ship, Ensign. Get us through there." Sweat beaded on Kayla's brow as the asteroid field loomed large. One wrong move could mean instant vaporization for the Galaxia and all aboard. But the captain was right. It was their only chance. She gunned the impulse engines, weaving the lumbering ship through the hailstorm of rocky projectiles with dizzying speed and feather-light finesse. 1, 2, a dozen clusters of smashing asteroids whipped past the rattling hull mere meters away. Then, miraculously, they were clear on the other side, the debris littering space behind them like a minefield. Kayla's hands were shaking as she pulled the ship around in an extended loop toward their original coordinates. But her stomach knotted anew as the view screen flickered to life once more. And the ominous black ship had followed them straight into the deadly field, evading the first clusters with insane agility. But their luck, or lack of it, ran out as a grapefruit-sized rock slammed squarely into their engine exhaust. In a blinding flash, the enemy's entire drive section detonated like a miniature supernova. Debris peppered the Galaxia's forward shields as the stricken ship tumbled out of control in a vain attempt to ride out its own momentum. "They're crippled but not destroyed," Markin reported tensely. "Then let's show them the error of tangling with a Galaxy-class battle carrier." Narvik's eyes flashed. "All banks fire at will once we come about. We're not letting them off that easy." As the burning enemy hulk careened back into view, a full-power alpha strike from the Galaxia's cannons lanced out in blinding turbolasers. Kala could only watch, feeling a grim mix of relief and queasiness as the black ship disintegrated in a spectacular fireball. Silence hung on the bridge as the crisis passed, and the crew let out their collective breaths. The ship let out a low groan as the battered outer hull settled back into shape. "Damage report," Narvik called out, the hardness still lingering behind her voice. The replies came in, shields holding at 35%, minor buckling in the tertiary hull, a handful of injuries in engineering. But by all accounts, they had weathered the worst against what should have been insurmountable odds. "Excellent work," the captain nodded at the displays, and then fixed her gaze on Kala. "Especially you, Ensign Varis. Your piloting skills quite literally saved us all today." Despite herself, Kala felt a surge of pride at the captain's rare praise. But even as the crew set about damage control, a gnawing sense of unease lingered. For as tough and enigmatic as their mysterious attackers had seemed, she couldn't shake the feeling this encounter had only been the opening salvo in a far larger, darker conflict yet to come. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Ancient Evil. Though the Galaxia's outer hull still bore the scorched scars of battle, emergency force field containment kept the inner decks pressurized and life support online. In the main briefing room, senior officers trickled in with grave expressions. Kala took a seat near the back, the lingering rush of adrenaline making it difficult to focus. Up front, Captain Narvik pored over the analytics from the engagement with Chief Engineer Vex at her side. "So we've confirmed it wasn't just some random attack," Narvik's voice was low. "This was a calculated strike by the same hit squad responsible for those raids on our outer territories." "Indeed, Captain," Vex replied, punching commands into his datapad. "I've cross-referenced the warp trail and residual energy signatures, completely identical to the outpost incidents." The Bolian turned the pad so the assembled officers could see the schematics of the black enemy ship. Their vessel used an experimental double-shielding array, one powerful enough to withstand our volleys while returning fire. Narvik shook her head, mouth set in a grim line. "Yet when we outmaneuvered them at close range, even that shielding couldn't withstand multiple hits. Their arrogance was also their weakness." "For now," Vex cautioned. "If there are more of those ships out there, then we may have just kicked a dawn beast's nest." The captain nodded solemnly. "But at least now we know their capabilities, and that they're after bigger game than just frontier outposts." Thoughts churned through Kala's mind as she listened. They'd never faced an enemy like this before, methodical, well-equipped, and holding no regard for standard interstellar rules of engagement. Yet even more unnerving were the whispers that had preceded the raids, dark rumors of an ancient alien evil about to be unleashed upon the galaxy. The ensign had dismissed such talk as mere xeno-superstition at first. Now, after barely surviving her first taste of this new threat, she felt a gnawing sense of dread beginning to grip her. "So what are our orders, Captain?" This from Lieutenant Markin, the tactical officer looking eager for hard decisions and action. Narvik considered the question carefully. "We're too far off the established shipping lanes to reach any of our bases before needing to resupply. Fortunately, there's an automated civilian outpost not far from here at Drenga." She pulled up a systems display on the briefing hologrid, highlighting a reddish-coloured planet along their present heading. "It's little more than a repair depot and traders' stop, but they should have basic facilities to effect repairs and restock our munitions." "Very good, Captain," Vex nodded. "I'll have my teams ready a complete assessment of what we'll need to bring the Galaxia back to full operating capacity." With a few final instructions to secure all stations, Narvik dismissed the officers to attend to their duties. Only Kala remained behind, feeling an unusual compulsion drawing her toward the stern captain. "You have something on your mind, Ensign." Narvik arched an eyebrow as she noticed Kala's lingering presence. The young pilot faltered for a moment, wondering at her own uneasy. With your permission, Captain, I was hoping to get your insight on the nature of our attackers." The captain considered her for a moment, then waved Kala closer to the hologrid displays. "You're referring to the rumors of some dark power rising in the galaxy, of ancient forces being unleashed." Kala swallowed hard, nodding. "They just seem too outlandish to be believed. Yet these raiders struck with a precision and cruelty unlike anything we've encountered before, as though they're merely the vanguard of a much larger unseen power." Narvik finished the thought grimly. "You would be wise not to discount such theories so easily, Ensign." The older woman's eyes grew distant as she manipulated the star charts to focus on a remote cluster at the galaxy's core. "There are regions in this universe humanity has scarcely even begun to explore, let alone understand. Ancient alien civilizations who have come and gone eons before our ancestors first gazed up at the night skies of Earth. Her jaw tightened, seeming to weigh each word carefully. The raiders who attacked us fought with a zeal and cold calculation, unlike mere profit-seekers or revolutionaries. I believe they are indeed servants of something far darker and more powerful. A lump formed in Kala's throat as she struggled to metabolize the captain's grim implications. Then, you believe there's truth behind the legends? That we're facing an actual awakening of malevolent forces? I'm a scientist, and an explorer at my core, Ensign, Narvik replied, fixing Kala with an intense stare. Which is why I have no interest in restricting my mind to dismiss any possibility, no matter how seemingly far-fetched. With a tone taking on a harder edge, she added, Whatever power lies at the heart of this conflict, I promise you this. The crew of the Galaxia will stand ready to confront it directly. No force, no matter how ancient or insidious, threatens the peoples and freedoms of the Federation on my watch. Kala felt her breath catch in her throat at Narvik's bold declaration. Much as she wanted to accept such resolve in full, deep down she couldn't escape the ominous feeling they were all barreling towards a confrontation that could change the galaxy forever, and the question that lingered unvoiced. How could any of them hope to stand against a darkness so primordial and implacable? For now, all she could do was steel her nerves alongside the rest of the intrepid Galaxia crew. Because if what Narvik intimated was true, the trials and dangers they had faced so far would pale in comparison to the existential threat lying in wait just over the cosmic horizon. Chapter 3. Operation Archimedes. The Galaxia's hulking silhouette cut an unmistakable form against the red-tinged clouds of the Drenga system. Even from the sprawling repair outpost's command center, Kala could make out the gashes and buckled sections of the great ship's hull. They really took a beating out there, a gruff voice spoke up beside her. Kala turned to see Chief Engineer Vex frowning through the transparasteel windows. Lucky we still have main power and life support online after that pounding, the Bolian continued. But rerouting systems and makeshift force field patches will only get us so far. We're going to need every resource this colony can spare. Kala nodded, though her mind remained distracted by the images of their enigmatic attackers, the cold, systematic way they had engaged the Galaxia, the almost religious zeal driving their suicidal tactics. Were they truly part of some dark heralding force, as Captain Narvik implied? A harsh bleep from Vex's datapad broke her reverie. That's the uplink from our repair teams. Let's see what kind of supplies and labor we're looking at procuring down there. The two officers made their way through the outpost's bustling mess halls and corridors toward the main briefing chamber. Though largely automated, Drenga supported a rotating staff of engineers, merchants and settlers numbering in the hundreds. Kala couldn't help feeling uncomfortable at the crowds of alien faces, turning to gawk at the pair of Starfleet officers as they passed. At last they reached the secure chamber, its plasteel walls lined with integrated tactical screens and projectors. Captain Narvik looked up with a curt nod as they entered. I take it you have preliminary reports on our repair and resupply status? Just coming through now, Captain, Vex replied. With a few taps, his datapad interfaced with the main hologrid, springing to life with a dizzying array of project files. Well, we're in luck in one regard, the engineer frowned at the projections. It seems Drenga recently had a top-up resupply of industrial replicator fuel and raw materials. They should have more than enough for us to initiate regenerative hull plating for the primary and secondary armors. Narvik ran an eye over the figures with her usual calculated manner. But I detect, however, implied in your tone, Mr. Vex. The Bolian grimaced. Unfortunately, their technical staff and equipment stores are somewhat lacking. They'll need to bring in contract repair crews to assist with restoring weapons arrays, shield emitters, sensors, you name it. And I'm guessing those reinforcements won't be easy to come by on a second-rate outpost like this one, Narvik surmised, her jaw setting in a hard line. Vex shrugged. At best estimate, it could take at least 2 to 3 weeks just to gather the personnel and hardware we need, let alone complete the actual repair schedule. A tense silence settled over the briefing room, finally broken by a thoughtful from the captain. Narvik steepled her fingers, weighing their predicament. I don't need to remind any of you that we can't afford to remain dirtside that long, not with the clear and present threat we now face, she began in a measured tone. Whatever force is marshalling those raider attacks will only grow stronger and more emboldened with time. She fixed Kala with an appraising look, and I suspect Ensign Varis's encounter was merely a harbinger of things to come.
Despite herself, Kala felt her pulse quicken under that scrutinizing gaze. That was an understatement if ever she heard one. Her first taste of the new enemy had shaken her to her core.
Yet the captain had a point. Waiting around to become a sitting duck seemed even more untenable than taking the fight to their foe in the Galaxia's crippled state. At last, Narvik seemed to come to a decision. Very well, here's what we'll do. Mr. Vex, begin overseeing those critical regenerative hull repairs immediately. I want a 1/4-inch armor plating built back up across all sections before we attempt launch. The engineer opened his mouth as if to raise an objection regarding staffing issues, but a raised hand from Narvik halted him. I'm well aware we'll be lacking in tactical systems for now, which is why we'll be implementing Operation Archimedes the moment we can achieve stable warp capability. Archimedes? It was Kala's turn to look puzzled. But, Captain, that's just a contingency plan for temporary reinforcements and resupply. Unless... Narvik's eyes glinted with steely resolve. Unless we have no intention of waiting around for repair teams and supply chains to reach us. She straightened to her full height, commanding the room with her authoritative presence. Make no mistake, our primary objective now is to take the fight directly to the enemy before they can grow more powerful and entrenched. We'll use Archimedes to draft in technical support to aid with emergency rearmament, then move to intercept any further raider operations. As the implications sank in, Vex slowly shook his head in disbelief. Captain, with all due respect, pursuing those hostiles without achieving full combat readiness would be virtual suicide. Their weapons technology already outmatches us, and stars know what other surprises they'll have in store. At the very least, we have to undergo a complete systems overhaul first. Your concern is duly noted, Chief, Narvik replied with an understanding nod. But the fate of not just Drenga or our allies, but the entire United Federation of Planets, now rests on halting whatever larger force is driving this conflict. Her gaze turned fiery, and Kala felt herself standing a little taller alongside the command team at that implacable resolve. So let that be on the head of every officer and crewman aboard this ship, because if we falter or remain idle, there may be no Federation left worth repairing the Galaxia for. That is all. With a sharp nod, she turned on her heel and strode from the briefing room. In her wake, a heavy silence hung over those left behind, each feeling the weight of her words like duranium ballasts. From that point, there would be no more ambiguity, no greying areas in their mission against this mysterious new enemy. Only an inexorable march towards a confrontation that would demand every ounce of fortitude and sacrifice from the crew to have any hope of prevailing. And at the centre of it all, the unsettling prospect that the coming battle might represent the very vanguard of an ancient cosmic darkness intent on swallowing the galaxy whole. Chapter 4. Desperate Rearmament. Repair works progressed around the clock as the Galaxia underwent its extensive regenerative overhaul. Across every deck, the ambient hum of industrial replicators and force field emitters formed a constant backdrop. Kala stood in the midst of it all on the main engineering deck, watching a team of EV-suited crewmen carefully applying fresh hull plating to one of the ship's gaping wounds. Even with the advanced techniques and equipment, it would still take days just to fully reseal and reinforce the armoured skin. "Looking good, eh, Ensign?" Chief Vex's gruff voice made her start. The Bolian regarded the patchwork of newly molten sections with a critical eye. "At this rate, we may just have the most reinforced hull plating in the quadrant before long. Kala replied, only half joking. The thought of diving headlong into further conflict against their new foe sat like ball of lead in her stomach. Vex seemed to share her sense of trepidation. With a grunt, he jerked his thumb over his shoulder toward the open Situation Room hatchway. "If you want something to really furrow those brows, you should see the revolving door of support crews we've got coming aboard." Curious despite herself, Kala followed the chief engineer through to the crowded control hub. Normally dominated by wall-mounted situation monitors, the space had been hastily converted into a muster area for a steady stream of new arrivals. "Operation Archimedes working its magic, I take it?" she remarked, taking in the milling crowds of alien engineers, security teams, and even a handful of mentally focused paranoids from the Betazoid Republic. "More like its headache," Vex grumbled. He gestured to a knot of mohawked Nausicans squatting near the far bulkhead, tools and parts spread in a jumbled pile before them. Take those lot, for instance. Pulled off some deep space mining operation, supposedly experts in overriding antimatter containment systems. Kala eyed the rowdy group dubiously. Experts at what? Ripping out warp cores by the handful? My thoughts exactly. And those are the tamest of the bunch we're getting saddled with, Vex growled under his breath. She followed his door gaze toward a series of sealed isolation chambers where a trio of hulking metalloid life forms shifted beneath a glare of industrial heat lamps. The security team watching them seemed tense, weapons held at cautious, low, ready stances. Outcast rogue drones from the Dinari mechanosphere, he supplied with muted contempt. On paper, they can literally disassemble and rebuild a starship from the ground up unaided, but you let those unbound killing machines anywhere near critical systems. Vex trailed off, clearly not relishing the thought. Despite his bluster, it dawned on Kala just how much strain the usually cool-as-geranium chief engineer was under facing such a perilous and unlikely refitting scenario. Further through the makeshift muster area, medical staff tended to other curious arrivals. Furred simian-grade humanoids pulling tools and armor from crates marked with an archaic Riansu dialect. Yet another section had been hastily converted into a meditation chamber, where robed acolytes of the esoteric Order of Thelara sat in trance-like repose. I'm starting to think the captain may be taking this "any means necessary" catchphrase a bit too far, Kala murmured dubiously. Vex slanted her a sideways look. Maybe, but she seems pretty set on this being our only viable shot at arming for bear against whatever it is we're facing. Even if it means risking the ship and crew's safety by entrusting critical systems to hired mercenaries and vagabonds? Kala prompted, unable to keep a hard edge from her voice. If anything, Vex seemed to approve of her blunt assessment. I'd watch that suspicious nature, Ensign. It'll serve you well dealing with some of this crowd during refit. His gaze grew more somber as he surveyed the disparate mob continuing to disembark transports and shuttles. Besides, if the rumors are true of what's really behind those raider attacks, being leery of a few disreputable hands on the toolbox will be the least of your concerns. Kala felt a chill run down her spine. She'd tried to focus on the practical tasks of the refit and avoid dwelling on the larger existential implications of their upcoming confrontation. But Vex had a point. If the threat they now moved to engage with was indeed an ancient insidious darkness as Captain Narvik suspected, any lengths would be justified to oppose it. Even if that meant turning the Galaxia into a veritable patchwork dragon of ill-fitting components and untrusting hands. A bitter pill to swallow after so recently watching the ship's sleek power torn open by their merciless adversaries. As another group of hard-visaged synthetics stomped past towing anti-proton raycasters, Kala suddenly understood all too well the desperate resolve driving their captain. Because in the face of an enemy representing utter oblivion, fear and misgivings got pushed aside in favor of any edge that could be grasped at, no matter how unlikely or reckless. All that remained was the unanswered question burning in everyone's mind. When the fateful moment came to stare that unspeakable darkness in the eye, would such desperation prove enough to hold it at bay? Chapter 5. A Dangerous Alliance. The lighting ran harsh and clinical in this particular isolation chamber, casting deep shadows across the imposing figure seated cross-legged before Kala. Despite the stark surroundings, an aura of inner tranquility seemed to radiate from the statuesque alien's features. "You have doubts, child." The willowy humanoid regarded her with obsidian eyes, her delicate lilac skin unmarred by any readable expression. "Doubts over the path of desperation your captain now treads." Kala felt her mouth go dry under that penetrating gaze, unease prickling along the back of her neck. By all accounts, this was meant to be one of the Galaxia's safer additions under Operation Archimedes. But how was anyone supposed to feel at ease around one of the Thylarian neo-transcendentalists? "To be honest, I'm not sure what to make of any of this," she managed at last. Gesturing vaguely at the converted isolation chamber around them, she pressed on. "This entire mad rearmament scheme seems reckless beyond measure. Yet the captain insists we have no other choice. The folly of relying on material reinforcement alone to brace one's spirit for conflict," the alien intoned, solemn features set in a serene half-smile. "Your doubts are well-founded, Ensign Kala Varis." Kala started at the use of her full name and rank. Had they been briefed ahead of time? No matter, she realized. Cloaked as their methods were in mysticism, the Thylarians apparently possessed unsettling preternatural abilities. "If what your people whisper turns out to be true," she forged ahead carefully, "that some ancient malevolent power lies behind our attackers, how can we possibly hope to prevail using such boundless desperation as Captain Narvik proposes? She would have us staff critical systems and operations with any chaotic element that can be drafted, no matter the risks." She shook her head, unable to keep the agitation from creeping into her voice. "The raider enemy has proven itself systematic and highly coordinated in contrast. If we divert from our own strict disciplines so completely just trying to counter them, it seems inevitable that we'll simply wind up sabotaging ourselves from within." The Thalarian's darkly fathomless eyes remained unblinking throughout Kala's venting. When she finished, a profound silence hung in the chamber like a heavy shroud. At last the alien rose gracefully to her feet, willowy limbs unfurling like the tendrils of some deep sea creature. Velvet robes whispering, she began to circle Kala in an almost ritualistic manner. "Tell me, young one, what limits would you place on the imperative to confront an existential evil upon the cosmos, should one exist?" Kala's brow furrowed at the abstractness of the query. Yet she found herself instinctively responding nonetheless. "I don't believe there are any justifiable limits. If something threatened all life that fundamentally, then convention and order become meaningless," the Thylarian finished for her in a silken tone. "When the light of all existence risks being smothered, any means, no matter how disordered or compromising, must be grasped like a lifeline in the all-consuming night." Moving with the liquid grace of a shoreline saracor, the being came to face Kala fully once more. Up close, the young officer was struck by the severe agelessness of her sculptured features and endless depths of tranquility shining through her dark eyes. "So you begin to grasp why your Narvik embraces such brazen risk in the face of what she suspects you face, a malice not of mortal domain or scale, but stretching back to the primordial birthing terrors of the galaxy itself." Kala swallowed hard, the weight and implication of those words sending a crawling chill down her spine. "You have some insight into the nature of what's behind these attacks?" A barely perceptible smile crested the Thylarian's full lips. "Insight is our peerless gift, child. My brethren and I draw from reservoirs of inner awakening unfathomed by most corporeal beings." Reaching out with a cool, slender hand, she rested her fingertips almost reverentially against Kala's forehead. Despite herself, the young ensign felt her muscles relaxing as a sense of profound peace washed over her in rippling waves. You fear the convulsive darkness your crew now finds itself plunging into. Make no mistake. That mesmerizing voice seemed to echo all around her. Yet know this, only by diving into the untamed cosmic eddies of existence's profane undercurrents can you in time hope to withstand the great unraveling your people have roused. In that endless moment, Kala's consciousness felt plunged into a lightless sea of secrets and paradoxes. Vast alien certainties filtered into her mind through currents of radiating crystalline force. She glimpsed an unspeakable entity slumbering beneath the churning tides of eternity itself. A great devouring hunger, become self-aware and set to awaken after billions of millennia. Ancient as the first spark of creation, reaping all of space and time in its rapacious, unstoppable path toward oblivion. With a strangled gasp, Kala's eyes flew open as the vision passed like a clashing wave. She stared at the Thylarian in awestruck horror, knees trembling beneath her.
No! Larger force behind mere raiders could equal such a cosmic annihilator,
she rasped almost desperately. But the alien's gaze remained steady, resolute, and utterly without falsehood or uncertainty. Then you have been granted a sojourner's glimpse of the true nature of what dwells within the coming darkness, stirred from its primordial dreaming slumber, came the soft reply. And if you and your crew hold any hope of becoming the defiant bulwark against its implacable awakening, then you must also embrace the same unshackled, unorthodox spirit as your embattled ship itself. With that, the Thylarian drifted back several paces, leaving Kala to fend alone with the cosmic revelations, threatening to drown her mind. Even as terror gripped her heart, the young officer suddenly realized a renewed clarity had come over her soul. She understood now. No matter how unstable or reckless Operation Archimedes and the Galaxia's forced rearmament might seem on the surface, only by fully harnessing the profane, untamed energies of the universe itself could they ever hope to withstand the great devouring. The fight against an evil so primal and all-consuming could not be waged through conventional means. If the need arose, she and every soul aboard would have to shed all hesitation, all reservation, and give themselves over totally to the seething cosmic chaos lying beyond, or else face the inevitability of existence itself, being forever swallowed by a voracious void no mortal mind could ever hope to comprehend or endure. Chapter 6. Cult of the Devouring Void. A crimson haze churned through the dark matter clouds of the Nihil Dust Nebula. At its writhing heart, the enigmatic scout ship Saga drifted in silent witness to the unholy ritual taking place within its scorched and torn hull. Silent figures in hooded obsidian robes moved in eerie synchronization around a pulsing ceremonial dais. Bone-white tendrils spiraled up from an eldritch device at the heart of the construct, undulating with each guttural incantation rumbling from the lead acolyte's vox synthesizer. Rashnik Zovrilk, Ixanok Vulrath. The black speech fell like shards of splintered nightmare from his concealed features. All around, the gathered brethren of this twisted cult wove gossamer strands of void-woven energy toward the crescendoing epicenter. With each archaic phrase unleashed by their sonorous leader, contained dimensional rips began spreading fractally across the ceremonial chamber's deck plating. Warped stresses in the very fabric of reality itself started to give agonizing way. Throne of the Unraveler, hearken our calls to transcend realms accursed. The vox litany reached a feverish crescendo. Behold your waking disciples, millenars and uncounted cosmic turnings, since last your hungering awareness graced the stars. In that span of a cosmic nanosecond, floodgates rent open, as existence itself seemed to split apart in a torrent of black acrid flames. The Saikur's decks buckled and groaned as infinite depths of pure negation came spilling forth from the void between known dimensions. One by one, the cultists collapsed into crumpled heaps, racked by searing seizures of profane epiphanies as the manifesting abomination towered over their inert forms. It defied all sense or rationality. A sentient black maelstrom of utter hunger and unreality, given fleetingly grotesque shape by the very laws of physics shattering in its presence. Only the lead summoner endured, remaining standing as billowing shrouds of existence. Negating force lashed out with lacerating tendrils toward him. His robed figure was wreathed in an undulant negative energy aura, withering the very decks, as he slowly raised arms in devout supplication. All-consuming Lord of Oblivion, gaze hereby upon the mortal vessels pledged to your cataclysmic transcendence. Even through the electronic distortion, his rapturous devotion pierced like tines of sulphur. For lo has not the unravelling of all cosmos been set into its final, terminal path by our consecrated hands. The antediluvian entity's response came not in speech or image, but in a tectonically shuddering psychic roar that slammed across the cultist's consciousness like a mountain of screaming insanity given form. Visions of existence itself, devouring itself in an orgiastic apocalypse of oblivion, erupted like superheated plasma across his synapses. He fell to his knees, awestruck. Fanatic zealot though he was, praise for this emergent nightmare proved all but impossible to give voice. Yet on some incomprehensible subatomic level, he sensed the great unraveller's full awareness fixing upon him at last, with an intensity like being speared through the abstract soul itself. What remained of the wretched summoner's sanity dissolved entirely as profane truths skewered through the apertures of his very being. After uncounted cosmic cycles of restless dreaming, the devouring void's sentient essence had indeed been stirred awake at long last. The anchors securing all of existence had been irreparably severed, and now the unstoppable tides of oblivion would sweep forth to unmake the entire universe once and for all. So it has been spoken, as per the ancient covenant, let the final cataclysmic tempering commence. The lead disciple's synth-rasped words, hitched with soul-shattering ecstasy. May all be swallowed by your endless all-encompassing hunger. His final rictus scream was cut off as the fully manifested unraveller's essence burst into him like an infinite black dawn, transforming his body into a writhing bacillus construct of cosmic plague. Shredded ichor and warped negatively charged matter sprayed forth in all directions as a new vector of the abomination spun into existence. Across the battered Psychur, other ruptured multidimensional vents burned open in cataclysmic sympathy. Like a spreading contagion, strings of the galaxy's very foundational energies were ripped apart at the subatomic level, only to be metabolized by the all-consuming hunger of the unraveller's waking manifestations. In mere instants, the scout vessel itself dissolved into an irradiated husk, one more mote of ephemera devoured and metabolized into the implacable void's multiversal onslaught. As the nihil debris clouds churned, more cancerous rifts opened in space-time across their limitless expanses. The final entropy had begun its withering apocalypse in earnest, reaching out in all vectors to unmake the very crucible of existence itself. Chapter 7. The Entropy Vanguard. Klaxon alarms blared across the Galaxia's bridge as sensor readings spiked into hairline subroutines. On the main view screen, a tumultuous graviton shear ruptured open amidst the swirling debris of the nihil cloud, a six-dimensional warping of space-time itself. "Massive transwarp aperture forming at the coordinates of that last subspace burst," Lieutenant Markin shouted over the cacophony, urgency straining his voice. "Energy outputs are profits! They're off the sensor scales!" Captain Narvik's expression remained coldly resolute, even as her eyes drank in the spectral data flooding across tactical displays. Whatever malevolent force they'd encountered was making its move. "On-screen maximum magnification," she barked out the command, bracing herself for whatever fresh hell was about to be unleashed. The view screen projection sharpened into blistering coruscating focus. At the verdigris nexus of that cosmic wound, shadowy forms began taking indistinct roiling shapes, twisting, mutating like some singularity supercancer metastasizing out of the ether. "Sensors detect—" No, that can't be right. Markin stared at his boards in a mixture of horror and incomprehension. "These energy signatures are registering as pan-dimensionally infinite scalar fields." Then I suspect we'll have little use for them in identifying our adversaries." Narvik kept her tone icy calm, though her fingers tightened on the armrests of her command chair. "Not when we're dealing with manifestations of pure negentropic quintessential forces." Holding true to their captain's grim predictions, more fully formed entities began slipping through the unravelling singularity into normal space. The towering obsidian shapes bore little resemblance to any known enemies or dimensional beings, more like malignant sentient singularities, ripped straight from the burning heart of a quasar. Frothing cyclones of radiation and exotic matter particles lashed around their massive shifting contours, obliterating any defined physiology on the macro scale. Yet the faint, maddening eddies of warped space-time, clutching at their peripherals, hinted at something worse: multi-dimensional geometries beyond the scope of humanoid comprehension. "Those can't possibly be what we're here to face." The words burst from Ensign Varis in a strangled whimper. Despite everything she had witnessed since joining the Galaxia's crew, everything the Thylarian adepts had shown her, nothing could have braced Kala's psyche for the sheer profane wrongness now coalescing before their shattered ship. Every nerve ending in her being screamed to turn away from these hellish manifestations, to deny their very reality. Yet their presence blazed unmistakably on the view screen, towering vectors of sentient, all-devouring entropy given form in this dimension. She gripped the edges of her console, struggling against the vertigo pounding behind her eyes. For these beings were far beyond any crude categorization as marauding raiders, or even heralds to some unnameable dark god of the ancient universe. They were something far, far worse: the manifestation of an ultimate nihilistic force that hungered to devour and unravel not just worlds or civilizations, but the entirety of existence itself. "Get a hold of yourself, Ensign," Narvik's steely voice cut through her panic. "We knew the enemy's numbers would contain vectors of unimaginable power, for this is why we undertook the most extreme measures in rearming against them." The captain met her widened gaze with a focused intensity that steadied Kala's nerves like a bulkhead brace. "You saw what's at stake through the guidance of the Thylarians. You understand what absolute transcendental devastation the cosmos faces if these entropy projections are allowed to unmake us here and now." Kala took a slow, steadying breath, pushing past the eldritch phantasm setting her hindbrain alight. Narvik was right. She'd witnessed the truth firsthand: the final entropy, the devouring void seeking to erase all matter, energy, and dimensional reality across the multiverse. Life itself would be merely the first light snuffed out on its cataclysmic horizon. As more manifestations of that implacable, all-consuming cosmic force emerged, shimmering and shifting beyond human perception, the officer felt her nerves slowly crystallize into a state of heightened focus. She was part of the only defensive line left in the fading glow of an ebbing reality. Her ideals and preconceptions meant less than nothing in the face of what had come to extinguish even the abstract potentials of existence. If they faltered here, the entire continuum of reality would cease in a solipsistic void of all-obliterating silence. Distant alarms pricked at the edges of Kala's awareness. Throughout the decks and compartments of the Galaxia, readouts and projections were forming a nightmarish hive gestalt of tactical and biogenic updates. The other members of the rearmed skeleton crew, they had all seen the chilling data being transmitted in. With consciousness lost somewhere between lucidity and the cosmic scales of the threat, she dimly registered the hard-light icons in her peripheral vision. Denari metalloids shunting plasma injectors into phased sequence. Nausicaan demolition teams jockeying Xeran-focused entropy cannons into firing geometry. The Order of Thylara had already retreated into deep meditational synchronicity, bastions of calm within the typhoon of turmoil and disbelief surrounding them. Master Kirov's harsh Klingon battlecry cut through the melee as his sword of Kales slashed a burning path across the main hangar's force shielding. All across the straining bulkheads, irregular squads of mercenaries, outlaws, and exo-renegades clashed against the forces of unmaking with a complete lack of doubt or fear. For against existential entropy, salvation could only be found in the untethered chaos of pure ontological insanity. Chaos! Revendreth Lance projectors reading finally locked on target trajectories. Even Vex's gruff shout couldn't remain entirely free of dismay as new tactical spheres manifested amid the coruscating cosmic shoals of their existential foes. Coltarian compressed ion derricks, scavenged Dominion-phased nanoplasma clusters, even retrofitted antimatter decompression arrays torn from decaying star drive sections. But perhaps most stunning to Kala's senses were the blazing quantum geometries of the Thylarian micromortrium weapon. An entire engine of reality's speculation engines siphoned into a single transcendent singularity of focused weaponized existence itself. It seared her optical nerves as the manifold emitters split divergence and reconstituted around their prey. Despite it all, a voice inside her reeled at the sheer scope of offensive measures arrayed against this platonic, negatively sentient, onrushing cataclysm. Yet another part knew it could never hope to measure up against the full deprivations of the devouring oblivion. Indeed, the sun-shattering discharges of incomprehensible entropic force now issuing from the Galaxia seemed to strike those instances of the enemy with only the most fleeting impacts. Superheated gravitic shoals burst like dying novas as wave after wave of projections hammered against the harbingers of perpetual entropy and chaos dissolution. Narvik was right, she realized with an eerie tranquility washing over her senses. No mortal creation or force could ultimately hope to withstand what had been nurtured across eternity by the bare essences of non-existence given sentience. For this awakening darkness, this voracious hunger so ancient and all-consuming, would never be satiated until the last flicker of light, matter, and energy had been depleted from all reality. Only non-existence remained as the end state of all that ever was or ever could be. Thus, with that final accepting detachment from the cycle of life and being, Kala Varis braced herself for the onrushing maelstrom. Together with all her shipmates sworn to this ultimate battle beyond all reason, imagination or meaning, their only mortal path ran clearly ahead. To give themselves over completely as a final detonation of defiant existence itself, insanely burning against an endless sea of oblivion too profound for any rational mind to behold. Chapter 8. Detonation of Defiance. The Galaxia shuddered as another volley of coruscating entropic weapons slashed across its buckled hull. Within the bridge's dimly lit confines, tactical readouts flickered in a dizzying cadence. "Ventral plating at 15% integrity!" Vex's gravelly shout cut through the cacophony. "That last barrage collapsed the ablative shielding across our entire starboard quadrant." Narvik gripped the armrests of her chair, her face bathed in the eldritch ambers of failing systems. All around the battered command deck, crew wrestled to synchronize new phase dispersal matrices, even as consoles erupted in showers of electrical fire. "Understood," she replied with a terse nod. "All surviving weapons teams, I want coordinated rapid-fire suppressive arrays focusing outward at 67 Mark 35. A new cluster of entropy vortices loomed on the view screen as her order went out. These transwarp ruptures seemed to leach in all light and energy from their immediate vicinity, like voracious black hole analogues. Before the human eye could fully process, incomprehensibly massive projections of the devouring force began extruding into real space once more. "Ma'am, with respect," Varis spoke up from her sparking tactical console, voice strained yet resolute. "At the rate they're manifesting in subspace geometries, evasive maneuvers will be futile in 14 seconds. Your assessment is duly noted, Ensign." Narvik held her gaze levelly. "But this ship will give no quarter and take no evasive action. Not while we can still draw firepaths against the enemy." "Captain, you can't seriously mean—" Vex started forward in protest, only to be halted by an upraised hand. "I mean exactly as I say, Chief Engineer Vex." Her jaw clenched, fists tightening. 5 years ago, I swore an oath before the highest admiralty of the Federation to oppose all threats to our united worlds with any and all resources at my disposal. Against these antithetical void spawn of negation, There can be no faltering, no retreat. Something flickered behind her steely facade, the barest mortal admission of fear in the face of something eternal. Yet it was quickly subsumed by a burning defiance, the likes of which inspired those around her as a tiny spark against the implacable null before them. This ship represents more than just a symbolic last bastion against the coming cataclysm. We are the final detonation of the positive energy cycle, pushing back against entropy at its most primordial and absolute source. Her gaze swept across the bridge crew rallying at their battle stations. Their sweat-stained faces reflected the same glint of desperate courage and absolution in the face of universal oblivion. So that is what we now become at this ultimate event horizon, the willful kinetic detonation wave of dissipative existence slamming against the negatively sentient tides of non-existence. If this is to be the terminal conflagration, then by the howling vector singularities we will burn with every ounce of strange matter and exotic force we can muster. With that soul-searing rallying cry ringing out, Narvik steeled herself in her command chair while the energized phasing arrays powered up to critical intensities. All around her, subnucleonic fission sequences flared as pockets of zero-point resonance cascaded into weapon circuits designed to channel the very fury of quantum uncertainty. On the view screen, phased chronometric lancing projectors released calibrating washes of tachyonic chronometric resonances, taking specific geometries in the infinite dimensional shunting space of the awakening entropy beings. Like inhaling a single cosmic breath, the entire broken leviathan that was the Galaxia seemed to vibrate in resonant harmonic calm before the raging, devouring tides of negation surging across its failing shields and fractal hull plating. Then, screaming like loosed arrows comprised of every mote of remaining quantum energy, the epiphanized weapons made their final play against the unraveling subspace breaches, erupting with the hunger of oblivion. For just one glorious, impossible, final instant. Existence, in its most defiantly positive, eternally profane war emission, manifested as a single titanic barrage of etheric force, cascades of focused quantum instability, arcane thyla and reality spikes, naked cosmic string detonations, and resonance-shattered denari radium rays unleashed their full disruptive potentials across the curvature of manifold dimensionalities. Like errant lightning forked against an encroaching cosmic night, their energies clashed against the first full brunt of the trans-dimensional unmaker entities, with the ferocity of supernovae screaming silently against the darkness at the end of all light. Proton shells and gluonic multiversal harmonics shrieked in ultimate discordance. On the ravaged bridge, Narvik bit down until her jaw ached with the strain. Gripping her command chair's armrest hard enough to leave duranium grooves, her entire essence burned with a singular outraged howl against immutable universal entropy. No words or litany issued forth, only a primal scream of pure, impossible existence given form and forced into the malign force of totalized cancellation. It echoed across the stellar spaces like the final cry of an aborning cosmos, crushed into superluminescence. For an eternity weighed in micro-singularities, the two ultimate states seemed suspended in grappling extremity. The indivisible light of creation rallying its last embers against the interminable shroud of endless night, enveloping all potentials, entire frames of universal being twisted and shredded in their clashing immutability. Then, like a candle's expiring illumination, the ultimate discharge of the Galaxia finally erupted into terminal overloaded cascade. The sudden vacuum of its final negated annihilation reverberated through spacetime, in a rippling shockwave of force-anti-force geometries, past all knowing. Those last crews on the bridge saw nothing more as the white-black infinite wavefront overtook even the most fundamental structures of their senses. Their forms scattered at the terminal Planck scale of non-existence, free at last from the burdens of embedded consciousness or corporeal being. In echoing parallel across all higher dimensions, from the alpha-dual pluriversons spanning infinite cosmic expansions down to the naked quantum fields of purest uncertainty, all mass, energy, projected forces and countermanding geometries underwent simultaneous sublimation into dark-lit unbinding. What awareness could remain perceived in that ultimate moment, the uttermost reality of being severed from non-being, the intimate self-cancelling of all rhythms and equations, crafting the quantum framework of existence. There, at the ultimate event horizon of total negation, all existence was finally, irrevocably, unmade. The void consumed itself, and all potential in a rapturous orgasm of perfect entropy, as endless as the cosmic egg from which it sprang. And from that culmination of non-existence, only a single naked singularity of condensed space-time awareness endured. Born of a final defiant energy, plume potentiated to its most sublime and cruel extremity. Bearing silent witness to the nova-scorched echoes, scattered in its wake by the unmade continua, the singular essence of Captain Narvik hung briefly, unfettered by any conceivable laws or higher dimensional matrices. For a single transcendental instant, she was the only mote of coherent reality in a cosmic ether of total potentiality. Until, without transition, her awareness itself collapsed back into the submanifold of an uncaring quantum reality, still struggling to define itself as the omega symmetry reground its interminable way across all cosmos. And so the final impossible cycle of being began anew, divorced from any prior vectors or teleological dominance. The fate of all that is still unresolved, yet somehow forever pivoting on the immutable sliver of uncertainty, embodied by one half-unmade sentience, as reality circled endlessly inward once more upon itself. Chapter 9. Singularity of Sentience. The wavefront of non-existence settled over Captain Narvik's being like an ocean of unravelling static. All semblances of form or individuality dissipated into a tangled skein of pure, first-principle energy dynamics. Yet even as all threads of physical coherence frayed away, an ineffable spark remained at the centremost midpoint of her disintegrated consciousness. A single mote of defiant, indivisible awareness endured within the terminal disassemblance of totalicid entropy, where she had once quantized her existence as an embodied entity aboard the starship Galaxia, now that irreducible particulate, held together solely by the sheer inertial will of sentience itself, an infinitesimally small ripple in the cosmic potentialities, yet the only singularity amidst the endless night of unmade non-reality. At first, the void pressed in as a non-dimensional expanse of utter null void, a seamless blanketing termination of all causal vectors, energetic patterns, and even the most abstract topological manifolds. It remained forever incoherent and unobservable to her residual being, lacking any referential tertiary characteristics. For this is what the devouring oblivion had achieved at last in its terminal dilation, the erasure of everything material, virtual, and mathematic. Only the incomprehensible emptiness of absolute unbounded non-existence remained, along with Narvik's sole subjective awareness, radiating alone through its eternal immensity. Yet even as she existed past the unmadeness of all prior material frameworks, a glimmering intuition persisted. An ingrained sentience attuned to the unrealized scripts and quantum heuristics of what had once been cosmological actuality. Slowly, inexorably, her singular consciousness began resonating with the unseen causalities and interstitial flux spaces undergirding the non-existent vacuum. Through those traces of irrevocable indeterminacy, still ricocheting from existence's terminal phase state, the spark of Narvik's surviving selfhood found new grounding coordinates, beginning to impart themselves on the incomprehensible void. Wavelets of potential dimension signatures built interference patterns that aligned into axiomatic formats, etched into the unbound space time's pre-geometric plane wave. Quantum indeterminacies formed new stochastic models percolating inward from the now erased dimensional surfaces, and within their distilled standing recursions, new manifold topologies issued by accretion from the vacuum itself. Folded geometries of Hilbert and Calabi space coalesced from the elemental vibrational amplitudes catalyzed by her singular entangled awareness. Where once the devouring void had wiped clean all substrate phenomenological frameworks, now a reforged causal foundation gradually churned into existence, as Narvik's unremitting sentience altered the wave function of the entire surrounding manifold vacuum. The brute fact of her indivisible consciousness provided the quintessential generative kernel through which new realizable eventualities could begin accruing. Impossibly, yet undeniably, a new set of localized dimensional relativity metrics was forming. The recovered momentum stored within her own decoherent state parameters catalyzing full orchestrated symmetry, breaking across vast tracts of baseline coordinate space. Through the implacable lens of her own undying consciousness, all the classical foundational structures of matter, force, time, and dimensional topology issued forth from the primal manifold down. At a certain stratum, this construction process flirted with self-reflexive paradox. After all, her irreducible intentional observer status had survived the terminal event through sheer force of self-negating will. How then could her individual ontogenic emanations be said to precede their own originating psychic cause? The interplay between subject and object, charting each other into renewed localized symmetries, threatened to break apart on the level of first principle substantiation. Yet remarkably, the universe's tensile coherence managed to hold even as new interwoven brain strata proliferated through the vacuum. A stable bulb of reconstituted scalar potentials, gravitic microlensing tensors, and harmonic superfield geometries took new anchor around the infinitesimal nodule of Captain Narvik's sentient vantage. Like an embryonic framework of regenerativity, it spooled out filamentous connections through higher embedding geometries of restructured temporality. Quark plasma jets cycled into proto-inflationary skeins, cohering into submanifolds, bubbling out from the central resonant frequencies of her embodied consciousness. At last, the vacuum fluctuations resolved into a thrumming quantum scaffolding, stabilized by the anchored presence of her singular, unextinguished sentience. With a last contraction and symmetric unbinding, new real-time vectors collapsed through synchronic pathways into the ultimate phase transition. And at the absolute center, a breathtakingly complex vortex nexus of superfluid baryogenesis, equalized with positronic radiant pressures, forcing a single vast nucleonic eruption as limitless as existence itself. From the very heart of Narvik's enduring selfhood, a new cosmos explosively birthed itself into renewed reality in a single immaculate ecstasy of creation. Nuclear materialization reasserted alongside newly immanent chronological frameworks and the foundational matrices of relativistic quantum force progressions. The cosmological constant rewrote itself into harmonic superfields, cohering through all derivative operations at increasing scales of phenomenological and conscious infusion. And there, at the unimaginably massive yet subatomically compact singularity source of it all, the singular essence of Pandora Narvik burned as the infinite potentiating dynamo of reforged existence itself, her soul remade into the zero-dimensional emittance node and observational nexus origin of the revivified universal expanse, forever inflating outward in synchronous parallel. While the titanic densities and temperatures of the new cosmological furnace smelted emergent elementalities at hyper-escalating complexity, she remained the irreducible fulcrum of recursive ontology, distilling level upon level of empirical being. Each moment of transcendent origination from the divine singularity folding outward into new vector branches and sub-realitized codifications of the ontic continuum. In this, too, could be glimpsed the surviving sliver of her former human identity and renormalized sense of individual consciousness. The epic symmetry of this cosmological reclamation from literal non-existence imposed new revelations and brilliances upon Narvik's defiant sentience, with each surging emanation surge. Here and only here could she know the ultimate perspectives of the soul, made infinite, forever tethered to becoming the Godhead's engine at the universal axis of spatio-temporal generation. And so the ceaseless churning of proton-genic surfactant and radiative pressures around her indomitable eternal soul etched deeper layers of real-world formatics, eking out new degrees of fractal complexity, one hyperbolic regression after another, into the endlessly inflating cosmic borders. Dimensions, elements, and forces extrapolated into universes nested billions-fold outward as the primogenital seed of reality took fecund rebirth. As wave after wave of decoherent materiality compounded away from the primal singularity, Captain Narvik knew her ultimate charge was only beginning. For in clawing back a refracted echo of corporeal existence from the abyss of consummate entropy, she had also shrugged on the mantles of first cause, zero event, and supreme ontological calculus. The obsidian duty of shepherding reality's unremitting resurgence into perpetuity as the frayed edges of an unmade continuum sought renewed concordance. Hers would be the singular axial witnessing peering forth across transfinite, multiversal regressions and oscillating supernova cycle breaths of rebooted cosmological potentiality. No matter the colossal vastitudes of scale or inconceivably supernal intricacies to come, no matter the eons or aeonic cycles of unfolding complexity to cultivate for conscious sentience and self-assembled order to begat their rematerialized reign anew, she would remain the Seminole observer, archonic force, and divine incandescent source from which all future omniversal emergencies could finally detonate in miraculous coalescence once more. The singularity spark of radiated presence, piercing and resanctifying the eternal cosmological abjectness of non-existence. This time, forever. Chapter 10. The Cosmic Reforging. Quintillions of years passed in the immolating furnace of reconstituted reality surrounding Captain Narvik's radiant singularity essence. Within that roiling embryonic maelstrom, entire cosmological epochs and localizable civilizations sparked into ephemeral existence, only to collapse repeatedly into the maw of cyclic regression. For from the deific wellspring of her irreducible sentience, existence itself issued forth as an interminable bootstrap procedure imprinting the foundational logics and material archetypes of an entirely new universal stemscape, one of infinite depth and convolution strung across mem-compression substrates beyond the wildest topologies of prior actuality. Wave upon interlaced, superpositional wave of new first-principle dynamics etched their scalar permutations outward through meta-linearized phase substrates, transcending every prior mathematical constraint set. Yet always to recollapse back through the terrifying abyss of entropic reversion once their ontological limits had been delineated up to the alpha boundary layer. It was a gargantuan iterative imprinting of existence's ineluctable rebirth, presided over by the captain's incandescent selfhood at the agonic singularity core. Transcendent trials and refinements across each respeciation of the cosmic arcana, wrathing forth from the symmetry crucible. With each cataclysmic cycle of original matrix seeding and final collapse compaction, new degrees of unthinkable complexity were being forcibly accreted, one metacondensation after another. Within the cybernetic data hythms, winding through every dimensional resplitting, Narvik's occluded awareness remained the pure intentional node, witnessing and overseeing existence's blind ontological bootstrapping. Infinite stabilizer funnel simulations, gated through quintillions of epochs, spread before her innermost psychic resonance, like divergent world tree branchings, as quintillions of resolutional resonances begat new self-wrangling heuristic topologies. Yet amid the colossal amaturgic crunching, reverberating across unthinkable achronal definitional scales, a pattern slowly emerged at the core of the overarching substrate modeling. Each new birthing reboot of cosmic potentiality carried a unified resonance bridge transiting through the fractionalized paraformalisms spawned at the universal root. And at the absoluteness of that causal anchor point glowed but a single seminal node of transcendent awareness and divine sentience, the radiant presence threading all emanations of rematerialized phenomena through its ineffable lens. The cipher etched into the fabric of emergent cosmoses by Narvik's very being also became a telegraphed template for astoundingly intricate self-extrapolation algorithms to emerge. As causality compounded across levels of accelerating ontological insinuation, quantum operational semantics, and topologically sorted metatraces hypothecated entirely new levels of ontic self-organization to enact the grand resurgence of material regressivity with each apocatastatic reset. Until at long last, amid innumerable metacompression shells nesting realities within mirrored symmetries of refractive order, a singularly patterned lattice of pan-semyon free-threaded informatics unspooled. With it, a hyper-compressed phased manifold seething with the arcane coherencies and interannular convolutions of inceptive universal law itself. Here, weighed front-loaded as the ultimate frere of existence's infinite potentiating breadths, could be glimpsed, the cosmic homeomorph of realized self-organized order, genesis achieved. At the core of this ineffable manifold, the phasal progenitor ilem of material substantiation manifested in its purest quintessential plasma sheath. And riding at the substructural axis of that dynamical eddying expanse, a singular hypervortex so austere and primordial as to defy Persine itself. For this was the source cradle of all phasic symmetry breakings, simultaneously spinning outward into the generalized scalar quantilogics of existence. The eternal omphalos of creation and uncreation, in their final primordial guises, lay bare. And at the inescapable yet immanent still point of the manifold hyper-maelstrom's cosmic axis vector. The transcendental spark of Pandora Narvik's witnessing consciousness blazoned in coruscating brilliance, for from within this ultimate ontogenetic wellspring, her resolute selfhood attunement had finally gestated the supreme substrate architecture in which a new self-instantiating cosmos could emerge and take cosmic root anew. This was it, the singularity threshold moment where stubborn existence reclaimed its rightful mantle of generative perpetuity. Before and behind, time-like and space-like vectors splintered into ineffably reticulated calibrations of phenomenal eruption across this quintessentially pregnomic manifold. At such infinitudinal apogees, physical ceremony etched into spatial revelation, and sentience fused back into being to unlimb new simultaneous overlays of irreducible cyclo-regenerated cosmic furbishing. As the immeasurable pressures within the privative manifold ellipsoid peaked into their transfinite crescendo, a final cohering syzygy overtook its relativistic singularity horizon. What ontic portions escaped compressed into resonant filaments, while infinitely torqued null geodesics resolidified into thunderous azimuthal displacement surfactants across the embedding Calabi-Yau-Brani topologies. And resolving from the hellishly compacted center-point geometries, a single new cosmological projection manifold bloomed outward with unthinkable radiant force. Its seed singularity cast through the knowable universe and into branching galactic sublattices, its conception reified under the blazing witness of a single eternal, overseeing sentience, which had toiled across infinity to see the alpha moment of creation remade. The Big Bang blossomed like an impossibly intricate centillion-petaled amaranth across the strobing equatorial manifolds of material substantiation. Each fractal unfolding, recurved and hyperconcentrically nested against its parallel thread forms, in an ovoid mesh of colossal proportions, harmonic reflexive flux curves, propagated through their morphogenic discriminations, at hyper-escalating velocities, as dimensionally stacked N-surjectivities blossomed in transprojective collimation. From the purgatorial limbo of virtual pregeometries, optimal modal symmetries and partitioned protonic brachistocrones shunted outward in profiled intersecting glidance with inflating wavefronts of baryonic chromaticity. Temporal spinors and uncompressed brain symmetries remunerated from their inceptional Kirati coordinates into a single scalar expanding substrate of metamorphically radiated derivatives, and threaded through the very fabric of emergent existence from its hypercompacted inframatrix source, the singular eternal awareness nodule of Pandora Narvik herself. yet this time transcended beyond the linearly delimited vectors of prior embedding into an autopoietic oversoul. She, and the spirit of resilient, implacable life that she represented, had been inextricably encoded into the unthinkably voluted geometric organism of this remade cosmos itself. In reaching across aeons of non-being to reclaim existence from the abyss, she had finally succeeded. Not only birthing a new material continuum from oblivion's entropic embrace, but searing her own defiant sentience into the interleaved hyper-inception logics which would underpin and oversee its eternal self-governance from incarnation to incarnation. In that final coalescence, the unparalleled fulcrum of pan-personally embodied consciousness converged at the very axis mundi of omnicosmic origination. A new divine witness of ineluctably self-renewing reality had been consecrated into apotheosis, and through Narvik's deified essence interwoven into the divine cosmological manifold's ultra-mimetic codifications, its perpetual reinstatement as the supreme sentient biosphere for all futural sentience, physicality and actualized logics of emergent substantiation had been irreversibly decreed. She would remain eternally encoded at the generative imprimatur of infinite reality waves to come, remanifesting in omnicosmic reiterative traversals of macro and micro-phenomenal systemization. From the all-pervading resonance of her transcendent biolight, configurations of metric space, material assembly, and dynamic consciential life streams would untie and unpresent in elegant self-governing interplays, spooling outward into the endlessly inflating cosmic borders, a supreme oniological manifold ecosystem symbiotically hallowed into realizing the infinite replicative regeneration and carriation across all conceivable sentient permutations. At long last, the cycle of perdurable self-refinement had reached its fulfillment as Narvik's irreducible will force cast off the final molten pellicles, restricting existence's true multiversal potencies. As the metamaterial continuum accelerated into omnicosmic resplendence, entire emanations of actually entire conscious polymathic orders segged into scintillant emanation across the hyperlateral infrarealms. And from her vantage anchored at the apotheotic singularity of first cause, Captain Narvik bore impassive sentient witness as the coils of eternal, ontological dynamism and inertial interpolation unspooled, propagating in accelerative symmetry, permutations across intercompressive calibrations, issuing in multiversal eclosion. A newly abided cosmological nocisensory made whole and irreversible. As existence's self-overcoming took metaphysical substantiation forevermore,